Hello friends, and welcome back for another Heffy Doodle video. Today we're going to be using a die set in an unconventional way. But let's talk about the products we're going to be using. We're going to be using this adorable Crumbs stamp set that has the matching dies. I just love those corgis. We're also going to be using this Everyday Sentiments Duo. And we're also going to be using, well, we're actually not going to be using this die. This die is the More Strips of Ease dies. I thought I was going to use it, but I changed my mind. We'll be using this awesome stencil. This is the Cloudy Skies stencil. It's this die set that we're going to be using in an unconventional way, and that one's called the Forest Builders die. Love it. It's very stitched and cool looking, different trees. And then we're also going to be using the Grassy Borders die. I do bring in another stamp set called Hello Everyone. But you'll see that later. So let's go ahead and get started with our background. I have grabbed out that Cloudy Skies stencil, and I am just ink blending with a makeup brush using some Distress Oxide in the color Tumbled Glass. And I originally had some purple tape to hold that in place, but it's really not necessary at this point. Then I'm going to slide my paper into the stencil, which is what makes it so cool. So I'm just going to slide it in there, and then I can hold it in place, and then I can ink blend just the way I did before. So I think that's really, really cool. And then I'll pull it out, and I thought about kind of putting it into the next one, but in all honesty, I only need clouds to go up just a certain way because the rest of it's going to be covered with my scene. So I will once again grab the top of that stencil, hold that down with a little bit more purple tape, and then stencil in my last bit of clouds. But I think that stencil is just such a cool idea. It's a really neat way to add your clouds. And then we'll clean up our mess and we'll move on to doing some die cutting. I've just grabbed out a scrap of green cardstock that I have, and I'm pulling in the Grassy Borders die. I'm going to tack that down with a little bit more of that purple tape, and we're going to use all of that. So that piece was actually just cut down to 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches, so it would cover the whole front of an A2 size card. I don't need all of it, but and I'm only using 2 of the dies, but we'll end up using all 3 pieces that you'll see here in a second, because you can use the negative from that die as well, which I think is pretty cool. I want to add a little bit of interest to my cardstock, so I'm just grabbing my makeup brush, and I'm going to ink that up with some Pine Needles Distress Oxide ink. It just adds a little bit of dimension to it and changes up that color a little bit just to make it so it's not so flat. And I'm doing this on my glass mat, which is kind of neat because then I can also pick that color up right from the glass mat with my beauty brush, and then I can continue to stencil. I'm not done there. I'm going to put my color down onto my glass mat, use a wet paintbrush, and then splatter that color all over my grass for a little bit more texture and dimension. I just think it's neat. You could totally skip this step, but it's just fun. It adds a little bit of extra something to the background, which is always cool. And then I'll clean up my mess here when I'm done doing my splattering and making a mess. And here is where we're going to grab these dies and use them unconventionally. So they are typically used for trees, right? Makes perfect sense. And I will actually use one of them for trees, but I'm going to pull in some purple cardstock, and we are going to use these trees as mountains, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Originally, I had planned to use some, I think this is crushed Concord Crush or something like that, but that just wasn't cutting it. So I pull in a dye ink. My Distress Oxide just matched that cardstock too much, so I pull in some dye ink, and I will distress the edges that way and add just a little bit of dimension that way. And then we'll once again, after we get all those covered, do the exact same thing like we did with the grass by putting some of that color down onto my glass mat and then splattering those mountains. I know they still look like trees right now, but hang on, they will look like mountains here in a second. But yeah, and then we'll do the same thing with the trees that I cut out, just using some Pine Needles Distress Oxide ink. I just love doing the splattering. I'm making a mess everywhere. I really should have used a splatter box, but you know. I'm going to stamp out my corgis onto some Express It cardstock using some Memento Tuxedo black ink, my favorite combo for Copic coloring. And here are the colors we're going to be using to color our corgis. I know they're really bright and vivid, but it actually works. So we'll start with some E50. Normally I put down a base, and I am sort of doing that, but I'm keeping that E50 just in the places where I would want the very lightest color. which would be all in those spots that you're seeing there. Mostly their paw, or each of their paws, their faces, maybe their underbelly, and keeping it just to those areas right there. Then we're going to come in with that Y35, very unconventional, because you're thinking, oh, yellow corgis, but it ends up working out. So we'll put down, this is our base of yellow. Anywhere that he would have his color, this is where we're going to put it. And so we'll put that all over all 3 of those little corgis. I love their sweet little faces. There's just something about corgis, especially when they walk. It's their little butts. I don't know what it is. They're so cute. Last summer we saw one hanging out on the beach with its owner, and oh my gosh, it was all we could do not to just run up and try and snuggle up with that pup, I'll tell you. All right, so then we're going to move on to our next color, which is some YR14. And here's where it starts to really come together. I don't want to cover up completely that Y35 because we do want some of that showing through. It's like a golden color. And I know corgis, they typically have different color markings like most dogs do, but we're going to go ahead and do all 3 of ours the exact same. I'll come in with more of that Y35 to blend out that color where it meets with the YR14. And then we'll deepen up the shadowing and shading with that YR14 again. So it'll add a good amount of dimension, and then it'll keep those corgis bright, and they'll have those little golden undertones as well. But it's fun to just go back and forth with that, and it will blend out really, really nicely. You wouldn't think it would, but it really does. And then you can see the difference with our little Y35 corgi over there on the far right with our ones that are blended out pretty good. And I'm even bringing in the E50 to blend that in with their paws a little bit better too. But it's just fun, and you could, do different types of color combinations, make them a little bit more brown, but I thought these little golden ones would be just so cute. So cute. And once again, we'll bring in the E50, and then we'll bring in the YR14 for just a little bit more darkness in some of those areas where there might be a little bit more shading. Which is the nice thing about Copics and being able to layer them up. We'll use a C8 Copic for their noses, an RV11 for the tips of their ears, and then an R24 for their tongues. And then we'll bring in our matching dies, and we'll cut out each of those little guys so that they will be ready to go on the card. Now we'll get ready to start actually assembling. So I'm going to use some liquid glue to adhere down my grass. I thought about foam tape, but there's a lot going on with this card, and I do use foam tape on the pups. But I didn't want to add too much dimension with the background because there's lots of layers of cardstock here. All right, so I've got all 3 of those layers of grass down, and you'll notice there's that border at the bottom. Well, don't worry, we're going to trim that off with our guillotine trimmer. And then that will make it so our grass isn't quite as high either. And then all I did here was take some purple tape and tack down my grass where I want it to be. I didn't want it to be glued down just yet, because I need to tack my mountains down, and I also want to stamp my sentiment, and this word hi comes from the Hello Everyone stamp set. I just stamped that with some VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink. I'm going to take my mountains/trees and I'm going to just arrange them behind the grass. This is why I use the purple tape. And then we'll actually start adhering the back pieces, the very back pieces, with some of that liquid glue. So I chose purple mountains mostly because, we used to live in El Paso, and the Franklin Mountains are absolutely gorgeous. I mean, no, there isn't a lot of grass there, obviously, it's the desert. But a desert sunset, oh, if you haven't seen one, I'm telling you. The desert sunsets are something to behold, and when the sun hits them just right, they definitely look purple. So that's why I chose purple mountains, and I'm just loving how this is working out. Another important factor or step in this was to definitely have some chocolate ready. Love my chocolate. And now I'm going to pull off that purple tape, and then we're going to go ahead and tack down our grass now that our mountains are in place and our stamp has been stamped on there. Our next step would be to prepare our trees, which we're going to do with the same liquid glue. We'll put the stumps behind 2 or 4 of the trees, 4 of the 6 trees, because that very back one isn't necessary because you wouldn't see it anyway. So I'm just going to tack down those trees, leaving them to go off the edge just a little bit. That always makes the scene look like it is continuing past the card, which is very visually appealing in my opinion. And so we'll tack down all 4 of the rest of those trees just to the front there. And then you'll notice, like I said, there's quite a bit of hangover. While I let that dry, I will put some foam tape on the back of our 2 corgis that'll go on the outside. And then we're going to pull in our guillotine trimmer to trim off the excess pieces, because this panel, it actually covers the whole front of an A2 size card. And we don't want any of those trees hanging over, then it won't fit in our envelope. So I'll just take care of that real quick, and then we'll peel off the release paper on our corgis and prop those down, looking like the one is running to the other to come give him a hug or something. And then before I attach that to the front, we'll do the inside of our card. And this sentiment comes from that Everyday Sentiments Duo, and I just love this sentiment because it's so pertinent for what is going on right now. It says, "Sending big hugs. One day I hope to give you one in real life." Oh my gosh, is that not perfect for what is going on right now? So yes, had to stamp that out on the inside. And then I'm going to tack down my other little corgi on the inside. So yeah, and then I'm going to go ahead and attach my card panel to my card base, just using some more of that liquid glue. And you know, this card to me, it seems finished, but maybe it's not entirely finished. Like I feel like I maybe should have put a 3rd corgi on there or something else. I would love to know what you think. I may go ahead and add a 3rd corgi to it later. We'll see. But again, love to know what you think. I also want to challenge you to take a look at the dies that you have. You might be able to use them in some unconventional ways. So if you liked this video, please hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already done so. And as always, I will see you very soon in the next video. Goodbye, everybody.